Carolyn, thank you. Especially because of your work, honoring and bringing forward Indigenous perspectives, it means a lot to me. I appreciate that. And in that sense, as I look around the room, there are so many of you who have worked in relationship to Indigenous peoples. And I understand that making these types of remarks, it's in concert with your own work. And aren't we all, those of us who have had a chance to work with Indigenous people, we are all aware, of course, that the most appropriate person would be an Indigenous person, and I have no doubt that in future gatherings like this, that's a real possibility. And so I thank John and Jeff very much for this opportunity to speak from out of this perspective, a sense of a student of Indigenous traditions, and how wonderful it is to be with a group like this of friends, mutually exploring ideas, new and old friends, and beginning to understand our way forward and stirring into the mix this very diverse perspective. And I had some thoughts to go this way. Where am I coming from? What brought me to Indigenous traditions? A story of my own background that might bring us to some short reflection then on the word Indigenous. And of course, I'm alerted whenever anyone says a short reflection, half an hour later. But anyway, I tried to, on the term religious, and then say maybe a story about, that will bring us into reflection on Indigenous religiosity, Indigenous traditions, something that will give us some flavor of what might be helpful for our discussions. And finally, if possible, some thought about Indigenous ways of knowing. Just another story to raise some questions for our discussion. When I was a young man, weren't we all one day? And hey, well, this is a group of Jungians I'm among, so I can go either way in that sense. I was in my last year of high school, and I got a job as a pollman on a survey team, and this job would last for a couple years. The next one was the summer, but this particular moment came in the summer after my high school education ended and before I went on to my undergraduate education. And as the poll man on the survey team and second to the senior poll man, I was learning from him and getting my stride, and beginning by the end of the summer to really begin to understand what this job was about, metes and bounds and measuring and setting out. And at one point there was this absolutely idyllic moment. There was lake lots to be surveyed in at a lake that had not been developed at all, which is an image for all of us in northern Minnesota, to the north and west of Minnesota, still very rural part of the world. And the only markers were at the old gravel roads, and sometimes they were 1.5 feet, 2 feet down, had to be dug down. Some of them were not even iron, they were stone with the crosses etched in them. And the surveyor would set up on them and run a line to see regarding the next point a mile away whether or not the orientation was right, but it also had to be done in terms of distance. So the other poll man and myself set out, and for 2 days we walked the mile markers around this area to see if the distance in the books was correct with regard to these points. And I describe it as idyllic because if you can imagine in that type of setting, very rural, very quiet, hardly a car on the road, 1968 and 1963. And my friend was ahead of me 300 feet at the end of a chain. And he had a ring of markers that he would put into the road, this gravel road. I would come behind and hold my tape, pick up the marker, and when he ran out, we'd simply stop and I'd give back to him, and we'd go on all day long. At a point, when I held my tape down, and as I was rising up, I turned to this field, and the field fell apart. It fell down into blackness. And it was absolutely arresting. And it transfixed me, this utter blackness of this field, gone. And a little voice came, and this voice said, "When your life goes to pieces, you can come and stand in this place." It was as if minutes had gone by, really a significant period of time. And I looked at my friend ahead, and he was just setting out. And I just sat out. And I went on to my undergraduate career, and I expected my life to go to pieces. So I was somewhat attentive during those 4 years. Maybe my own personal life going to pieces began to diminish, and I began to understand that experience as I live in a time that's going to pieces. And I guess that's been an abiding moment in terms of that experience. But I also wanted to ask deeper questions about it, and I think that set me out. It set me on a way. It was an exploration of religions, yes, or the spiritual engagement here. And I began to explore traditions, especially initially Buddhism. What could speak to this experience for me? And it was under Tom Berry's guidance and direction that I returned to my roots in North Dakota and began to ask elders among Native traditions, especially Anishinaabe. What I feel in that story is my own orientation towards studies among Indigenous people. What did I go to Indigenous people to learn about? What is it that we have brought to this concept of the Indigenous? What does Indigenous really mean for us? Is this a term that we have overlaid upon extremely diverse peoples in order to satisfy something in our own yearning? And I think that's a fruitful discussion. And without spending a lot of time in that, I think it has something to do with origins. I think it has something to do in my own field with origin of religion, the emergence of this field, Native peoples. If you think of those at early anthropological orientation towards Native peoples as us writ early. So we learn about ourselves by looking at them. And that stereotype enduring to this day, frozen people, Indigenous people frozen, so that any effort at movement into our contemporary world is seen as a fault, or they're no longer Indigenous. So those types of questions, I think, are fruitful for discussion in terms of this issue of Indigenous people and their closeness to bioregion and how we read that, because obviously another stereotype that's come up, and all of us are aware of it, the romanticization of Indigenous people, the kind of the glow of Native peoples. I wouldn't cast aspersions at anybody without first telling everybody that I'm in those stereotypes. I'm a white guy out in North Dakota. Well, I grew up among Native people. What did I learn about Fort Totten people near me? This is what I learned. Native people drank. They came to that marginal place, away from their own home, that marginal place where liquor was available, beer was available. Fargo, North Dakota was a place to drink. And so Fargo, North Dakota to this day, Fargo, Billings, Sheridan, these are real centers, Bismarck, North Dakota, centers of racial prejudice based on a kind of marginal, not middle ground, not a negotiated ground, but a marginal ground where Native people have come to drink, really, and where these non-Native people see Native people and form judgments. So these are deep in my own journey towards the Native traditions too. Who are these people we call Indigenous? It's such an ambiguous term, isn't it? The countercharge is made, of course, who isn't Indigenous? And I think many Indigenous elders respond to that with a ready affirmation. We're all Indigenous to this earth. But the term Indigenous has come to identify those small-scale societies that share a single language, It may have forms or even dialectical forms, but it's a shared language, a shared story system, kinship system, relationship to homelands, these incredible array of cultural relations among humans into the community of the earth that make them remarkable peoples then, huh? Where are they? My goodness, when you begin to think about it, the American hemisphere, Pacific Islands, Southeast Asia, South Asia, to me, yet, it boggles my mind when I think about India and indigenous people. Millions of people. Europe even, the Sami peoples up north, the African continent, Australia. So you begin to reflect upon it and the numbers reach, what, 500 million people that could be characterized as indigenous, shared language, culture, small scale society. But I think one characteristic that I'm much moved by, and let me kind of bring this discussion, this part to an end, is that these small scale societies, wherever you find them, are struggling to survive. That's the truth. And it was the 60s, 1960s, pressures on them had diminished. From the 60s, those pressures have mounted in ways that even the colonialist period, the expansion period, in which they were pushed to the margins, it begins to make those pressures pale. The resource extraction, the sense of being acclimated, acculturated into the dominant state. So the question I want to raise here is indigenous traditions and homelands, that relationship between indigenous peoples and their homelands and survival. And what that relationship has meant, all of the biodiversity, all of the geological diversity within those areas where indigenous peoples are now located, and that sense of what it is that they're trying to, they see as surviving. When they talk about when they talk about sovereignty, having voice in what happens to them, and survival, they mean something different than us. And I think one way to think about that is that survival goes into the landscape. Well, in that sense, then we talk about indigenous religions as a way of getting a handle on this closeness to the natural world. And that's interestingly now, many native people around the world, they will talk about having lost so much, and the only thing they have left are their religious ways, sacred ways, and now those are the area of intense exploitation. So India actually refuses to use the term indigenous. They have coined Adivasi, First Peoples, Original Peoples, Canada, First Peoples, Southeast Asia, Orang Asli in the Malaysian, Indonesian world, broadly speaking. All these different names for indigenous people. Among many native First Peoples, the term indigenous is now used as an organizational tool. And so, for instance, in South America, the term indigenous is used extensively. In other parts of the world, Africa, for instance, there's a hesitation by native peoples, original peoples, to use that term. They dislike the term. It's used in the South American setting and also in the UN setting as an organizational umbrella. So the term is ambiguated even in indigenous usage in a sort, but it's seen as a potential wedge, and it opens up a lot of issues. Sovereignty, survival, especially, is what I want to hang on there. In terms of indigenous traditions, it's such a diverse group of people we're talking about, how that's the underlying ambiguity of the use of the term indigenous. It's so many peoples, it's so many diverse languages. How can we say that they share a certain, for example, religious system? First, they don't. It's obvious they don't. They don't share symbol systems all across the field. But what I find interesting is there's a family resemblance among these small-scale societies, and perhaps an initial point to be made is that closeness to bioregion. and the way symbols have been embedded in human societies by virtue of that closeness. I myself spend the first day in courses on indigenous religions or Native American religions subverting terms that I want to use in this course. Native American, American Indian, indigenous, religion. I want to subvert that term. I want students to not use it without thinking about it. Where do they stand on it? So I definitely use these terms, but I want a certain reflective capacity on them. Religion for me is, without going into all of the subversive perspective, it's problematic because of the baggage it carries. We image the church, we image the minister. You talk about indigenous religions, you look for the church, you look for the minister, and so forth. So for me, the term lifeways is helpful, coming out of an anthropological perspective. The sense that if we're talking about the religious or religiosity of the sacred, it's embedded in the subsistence practices, kinship systems, social systems, cosmologies. So lifeway is a seamless perspective among Native peoples, broadly speaking. One story that gives me some sense of how to talk about this very delicate issue is my own entry into Crow traditions by virtue of a particular ceremony. The Crow we call Sundance, and the Crow call Ashkise. Ashkise is a big lodge. It's a lodge built in imitation of the cosmos. You go into that lodge, you're going into the larger cosmos. And the whole responsibility of the dancer, male or female, that go into this lodge in Crow way, Crow Shoshone way, to fast for 3, 4, 5 days, typically 4. Fast from food or water, and by the 3rd day, your senses are keenly tuned. If there's water anywhere nearby, you feel it, you hear it. So no drinking or eating goes on near the lodge. It's all a little ways away. And at the my first times to attend this, the Crow understood that as a teacher, I wanted to try and respectfully bring students into an understanding of this. And over the years, the family that took Mary Evelyn and myself in literally took pictures, which are prohibited, of the ceremonial, so that when I spoke with students, I could image what the lodge looked like, what the dancers looked like. And that was okay with some Crow, not okay with others. For the Crow, it's up to you. It was up to that family. After about 5 years, a set of dreams occurred in which an old woman was by a Sundance tree, and there were children with her, and they were bent over. And I danced into that dream, blowing eagle bone whistle, with the eagle feathers in my hands and in the dress of a dancer. And this old woman, as I danced back, said to these children, "That's the way to Sundance." So when I spoke to the elders that took us in, and the first time I told Adam Burdenground the story, this is no response, nothing. And I thought, well, I've done my duty. I've narrated this to him. That night when we were in the sweat with Sundancers, and when you're any ceremonial with Sundancers, is ratcheted up. These are people who went into that lodge not for themselves, primarily. We all know we're motivated by, and Crow also recognized, we have our own motivations. But the dance is for someone else. You go in that lodge to undertake this for someone else. It's for the people. And by people, I mean out into the landscape. So renewing this world that we live in. And in that sweat, those conversations, when Adam narrated my dream, when we came out, he said, "You better think about dancing." Next year, in about 2 in the morning, we got a call. Mary Evelyn says, "Oh, Violet Medicine Horse," and she hands the phone to me. "The elders have opened the door, John. Be here this Friday and bring this, and this." So I'm in this dance that I've been watching for 5 years, and I'm on the 3rd day fasting, and I'm on the 4th day fasting, and I want to tell you, there wasn't much left of me. And the dance was near ended, and the water was out there by the door with the 4 water women. And the sponsor and the shamans in the back of the lodge called to the drummers for the water song. And the drummers said no. Think of it, the groups at a ceremony. We think of a Native American ceremonial. Well, someone has absolute authority and it just goes forward. All these groups, dancers, the healers, the sponsors, the families out there, the drummers, all of them are negotiating during this ceremonial. They're trying to do something. They're really trying to attune themselves to bring this world up, keep this world going. And the drummer said, no, they haven't suffered enough. I mean, I'm hurting. And they negotiate, and there's going to be 7 songs sung for 7 individuals who help. They bring them in, and the dancers are all stand up, put their whistles in, and whistle while these the vision songs for these guys. I could have faked it, and I had in mind to fake it. I couldn't. My embouchure of my lips was gone. But the 7th guy was Bill Grovon. He made the whistle I'm blowing. I mean, he's a veteran. It's like one of these exceptional elders, And so by the time it got to Bill, I was just done. I mean, I was really done. I couldn't hold her anymore, just down and when my whistle fell, down in that Timothy grass was a cricket. It was a really big black cricket. And I watched that cricket, and it just came towards me, and it jumped up on my foot, and bam! I mean, just this electricity. I had my whistle. I was there, for Bill. I was bringing up the earth, And I talked with my family, talked with Crow elders about this. What happened then? What was that about? And I think this is what I want to say about Indigenous religion. It's a gratuitous statement, but this was a gift, they say. Isn't this all a gift? From an Indigenous perspective, it's a cosmological perspective. What was given, I love this Given Institute. We're in the Given Institute. This gift that was given comes out of giving. So the world is a giving realm, and we experience it through these gifts. And our responsibility is to really stand in that place of the given, and to participate in this ongoing giving. So I just wanted to play on that, these relationships between the process orientation of so much of Native thought, that this is a dynamic world, and the efforts in their language to talk about this dynamism. The signal virtue of the dancer is to achieve diagashe. And that's to stand in the place of their own determination. And you struggle to that, you fast to get to that. And the only way you know you're getting close to it is you experience aklite. AK is a suffix in Crow, talks about it's an instrumental. A lite is an orphan, of which there are none among the Crow. Lite is an absent. No one among the Crow. Your parents die, you're adopted by someone else. Adoption is, the lines of adoption in Crow are a whole discussion in itself, especially with regard to ceremonial life. But aklite, to become like an orphan, is on the road to accomplishing the agashe. The whole fasting experience having been reduced to very little of John Grimness anymore. And a lot of community participation, a lot of initial humor about what do you want to drink, what kind of beer are you going to have, and after the second day, what kind of Coke, or third day, water, and fourth day, it's just silence. And you're with everybody, and you're just waiting with this please be over. And this overness, this aklite, this yearning for something to be over, it opens something. And that's what the Crow treasure most. This is what opens, and I'm trying to suggest the givenness. I'm almost out of time, but I do have this moment. This is my word on Indigenous ways of knowing. Hey! When that old man told me, you set up the winter dance pole, set up the pole for people who need some healing anytime, including yourself, So I often set up the winter dance pole. That's the pole at the winter dance. It's a lodgepole pine when they do the ceremonial. It's a straight pole. Only the singers go to that. And at the winter dance, these songs, these people who have songs about 8 at night till 9 the next morning, they sing the vision songs. It's incredible ceremonial. It's just so overwhelming to feel people telling their knowledge, giving their knowledge. Yeah? Salmon song, deer song, bitterroot song. People are telling, when it comes time next year to gather bitterroot, it's bitterroot song. Kama song, you know, we know it's out, and no one has to come out there and, hey, I'm deer man here. No, it's a deer song. And they're so exquisite, these songs. And then the daytime people gamble, sweat, sleep, eat, and tell stories. And one of the stories they tell is how Coyote got this world and made this world the way it is. So when these Salish people think about the world, this is one of the ways they think about it. When Coyote and his brother came down to this place that Ilchmewem had made, I'm not sure what Ilchmewem is like I don't know. I've never met a person who has a song from Ilchme. Is it a distant creator? I don't know, but it's like the possibilities were there. I guess that's the way I understand it. Because something was there when Coyote and his brother came down, and the powers in the 4 directions, they got all their powers together in 2 bags, and they gave 2 each, 4 bags and 2 each to Coyote and 2 to his brother. And they came down, and Coyote went one way and Coyote's brother went the other. Coyote's brother is a lot like you and I. He's a real linear type. He just went around. That was his duty. He just went around. Coyote, being Coyote, you know, he pawed this and pushed over that, and he created this and he made that, and he pissed on this, and he made the world the way it is now. And when they came around, Coyote's brother saw him in the distance, and he called out, "Hey, Coyote!" And Coyote came up to him and he said, "I'm not Coyote. You're Coyote." And his brother was really taken aback, and he thought he'd give another go at it. He said, No, I'm your brother. You're Coyote." And Coyote looks at him and he says, "I'm another one." And Coyote's brother took his 2 bags of power and he put them up on that rock that Coyote had made. And Coyote took his 2 bags of power. The brother had made the wager, so Coyote gets to set the terms. So Coyote says, "We'll run by those people over there. I made some people, Coyote, and we'll settle this." And so Coyote's brother goes running by, and the people say, "Hey, there goes Coyote." And then Coyote goes by, and there goes another one. And that's how Coyote won all the power. It's a story that has all of that wonderful humor in it, especially when you meet or you see at the Winter Dance Lodge the most auspicious elder coming in, go around to every person, and everybody would do this. We'd all go shake hands around. But that elder that you just kind of have an aura around, and they go to shake hands, and this the elder who they're shaking hands with doesn't even look at him. And they shake hands and they say, "Who's this?" And that person will say, that auspicious elder say, "It's another one." And you know all the play that's going on here. What's happening? What's embedded in this in terms of ways of knowing? I think these Salish people see the world as charged with a call for attention. I don't think we can take it for granted from their standpoint. I hear a lot of people write about shape-shifting and that shamanic thing, and that's kind of cool. I can appreciate that, but it doesn't catch it quite for me, because what I want to emphasize is this sense of the real empirical character of, say, ayahuasca brewing in the Amazonian region of South America. I mean, it would be really simple if it was you took the vine, the Banisteriopsis, and you boil it, and then you drink it, and you get this vision. But this vine has to be accompanied with several others, and depending on how you can vary how this brew, what it will do to you. And so this is pharmaceutical, or a kind of gathering of materials that raises the question, how did these people come to this? And when they are asked, as Jeremy Narby does in Cosmic Serpent, and again in his new book on Indigenous Ways of Knowing, and other people have affirmed this, and I've had my own experience in the Philippines of something similar, that the response about this knowledge is it came from the plants themselves. It wasn't just humans attentive and learned the knowledge through trial and error. I figure there's a lot of both. But for me, what's in between is really crucial, that attentive relationship. And that attentive relationship, I think, is part of what the Salish are talking about when Coyote made the world. It's indigenous ways of knowing are really attentive to that world, and it's speaking, as David would suggest to us, up from out of this world. You know, it's got that powerful sense of the gravity, our relationship with this earth, the real grounding in it. And I think a last point is we make much also of the human-animal relationship in indigenous traditions, and certainly totemism is a striking example of that, and Anishinaabe people in that sense of the totem and in the clan concept. It's very interesting, but I think we limit ourselves when we think of that kind of one-on-one relationship and vision questing. You know, you have some animal, you establish a relationship, because in the native traditions that I've had occasion to either enter into or study, even in ethnography, that it's multiple realizations. It's not just this one-on-one relationship. That once you enter into, well, you're born into a clan. Crowway, you get your mother's clan and your mother's name. And what is that clan? Big Lodge in Maui. And then it was several years later, and people were saying, well, you know, you're actually newly made lodge. You know, well, what's going on? This is a relationship not with an animal here, but with a human construct. But what it's made out of, all those relationships, that's what that clan is about, all those relationships. It's multiple realizations. And in every setting, I would argue this, that even in the vision questing, the sense that relationship that's established with a particular spirit progenitor that some native people speak of, it opens multiple realizations. And I sense that's part of what we're about here, the sense of shared storytelling, shared reporting out on data that we have from people who are deeply embedded in different perspectives of these issues. And we're coming together in its multiple realizations. So at the narrative, it strikes me as I'm particularly given to that. You know, I was going to bring a flashlight and do a little PowerPoint and a little duck thing, and I was going to end by doing wipe out. Oh.